Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah shiur. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Chanukah. I'm recording this shiur on Motzi Shabbos Parsha Shemais. I had said when we were last together on Thursday that I would try to record a shiur on Friday where I would go through some of the Dirshu footnotes on Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Beis. Now that it's Motzi Shabbos, we are currently holding on Kuf Mem Aleph Amid Beis. We finished Siman, right? We finished Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Beis, and we're up to Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Gimel. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to start Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Gimel, and in this way we'll finish off Daf Kuf Mem Aleph Amid Beis and pick up another page. I believe that will be relatively short, so if we do finish that with time allowing, I will go into some of the more fascinating Dirshu footnotes back on Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Beis. So for now, we're going to pick up on Kuf Mem Aleph Amid Beis, Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Gimel, Shemanim Upesilois, the oils and the wicks, HaKesherois, that are kosher for use, La Chanukah, on Chanukah, Ubay Dalet Seifim. And here we have 4 seifim. Says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph, Kol hashmanim v'hapsilois, all oil and all wicks, kisherim l'ner Chanukah, they are all kosher for use for ner Chanukah. V'af al pi she'ein hashmanim nimshachim achar hapsila, even though we know from Hilchos Shabbos that there are those types of oil or fuel that does not draw well through a wick. We have types of fuel that the wick takes very readily and it burns with a beautiful flame. Then there are types of fuel that the wick does not draw well, so you end up with a sputtering flame. Says the Mechaber, Af al pi she'ein hashmanim nimshachim achar hapsila, even oils and fuels that do not flow well through a wick, and therefore ve'ena or nisla yafe ba'isam hapsilos, or you have wicks that don't hold a flame well. So the Mechaber is referring to 2 different problems here. There are types of fuel that are problematic. It's a type of fuel that does not travel well through the wick, and therefore you don't get a nice clean flame. But then you also have wicks that don't burn well, and that's another reason why you would not have a good flame. In either case, says the Mechaber, both all of those oils and all of those wicks, everything is kosher for Neres Chanukah. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut in Aleph. Kol hashmanim v'hapsilos. All types of oil and all types of wicks are kosher for Neres Chanukah. Explains the Chavetz Chaim. Hainu, by saying this, what the Mechaber really wants to say is, Ki yesh shmanim geruim. There are inferior oils, inferior types of fuel, she'ein nimshachim achar hapsila, that don't travel well through the wick. V'chein, and similarly, yesh psilos geruim. There are inferior wicks, she'ein or nisla yafa behen, that don't hold a flame well. Uchidel b'siman reish samach dalid, like we saw previously in Hilchos Shabbos, in Siman Reish Samach Dalid, when we were discussing the halacha of Adlakas Neres Shabbos. Now, u'b'Shabbos aser lahadlikan. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to use these oils and these wicks. Now, the reason you're not allowed to use them on Shabbos is because on Shabbos there's an Isser D'Oraisa of haTorah. You're not allowed to make a flame. You're not allowed to make a fire on Shabbos. Because of the Isser haTorah, you're also not allowed to increase the size of a flame. So you have something burning, and you do something to make it burn bigger, brighter, faster, you are now being over the malacha of haTorah midaraisa. The fear of Chazal was, if you're going to light Neres Shabbos with inferior fuel or inferior wicks, then when you see that flame sputtering, shema yate, you might go ahead and tweak the wick or tweak the lamp. and thereby make the oil go better through the wick, and now suddenly it'll burn with a brighter flame, with a bigger flame. Or you might touch the wick to knock off some carbonized material from the wick, and you might make it burn better. And by doing that, you would actually be over in this daraisa of haTorah. For that reason, the Chazal asered using inferior fuel or inferior wicks on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'sal kedaitach, you might have thought the Chanukah aser gam kein lahadlikan. You might have thought that there's room to also forbid the use of these inferior fuels or inferior wicks on Chanukah. Why? Obviously, you don't have the same concern as Shabbos. There's no problem of Shema Yateh. You're not going to be over this malacha. But Shema Yavayu Lidei Kibui. Maybe since they're inferior wicks and inferior oils, maybe they'll go out and they won't burn for the necessary shiur. We learned that there's a shiur of a half an hour. Now, if you're using inferior wicks, inferior oil, maybe 5 minutes after you light it, it'll go out. Kamash Malan, the Mechaber teaches us here at Taf Reisha and Gimel, De'ein Lachish Lozeh, that we do not have to be concerned about this. And the Chavetz Chaim gives a reason why we don't have to be concerned, but that reason is tzarich biur. We're going to have to explain it. The Mishnah Berurah says, why don't we have to be concerned? The Kaimalon, because it's very well known that we paskin kavsa ein zakukla. If your Chanukah neres go out during the shiur, you lit your Chanukah neres, they're supposed to burn for half an hour. If they go out after 10 minutes, ein zakukla, you're not responsible for it. What that means is you don't have to go ahead and relight it. Why not? It says the Chavetz Chaim, the Kevin Shehidlik, because once you lit the Chanukah licht, nasa zecher l'neis, you accomplished what you needed to accomplish. You made a commemoration for the Nes of Chanukah. You did an act for Parsume Nisa. V'nigmara ha-mitzvah. The mitzvah is already done. You did what you needed to do. You accomplished the mitzvah. It didn't burn for the half hour. It doesn't matter. The hadlaka is oisa mitzvah. The lighting of the Chanukah licht, that's the mitzvah. You lit it, you did the mitzvah. It went out 5 minutes later, ain't zakukla. You're not responsible for it. You were yotzei the mitzvah. It went out 3 minutes later after you lit. Kavsa ain't zakukla. You don't have to relight it. You want to relight it, you could relight it. But you were yotzei the mitzvah even if you don't light it. Now, I said that this is tzarich biur. So first, let's take a look at a quick Dirshu footnote. Dirshu footnote number 2. Dirshu footnote number 2. It's on the next page. It's not in the back. It's in the next page. Okay. However, im roya she'eno or nechaz bapsila vu bevada yichbe. Let's say you're lighting the Chanukah licht and you see that the flame is just not catching well to the wick. And you know that when you pull the shamash away, it's going to go out right away. So do you say kavsa ein zakukla? I lit it. It burnt for 0.3 of a second, and then it went out. Do you say kavsa ein zakukla? No. Kasav la'alon, we're going to see later on, she'ena yotzei b'ad lakazu. If the flame never took, and it's obvious that it's going to go out immediately, you can't be yotzei with that hadlaka. The chayiv me'ikar adin laksar lahadlik lachar kibui. Over there, you would taka be mechuyev al pidin to go ahead and relight. So what we see so far over here is, we have the Mishnah Berurah telling us over here, you might have had a havamina, that you can't use inferior wicks or inferior fuel, because maybe it won't burn for a half hour. So maybe we should say, no, you have to use good fuel, you have to use good wicks. Kamash Malon, the Mechaber is teaching us, no, we don't have to be concerned for that. And the Mishnah Berurah says, why don't we have to be concerned? Because of the rule, kavsa ein zakukla. The rule is, hadlaka oisa mitzvah. When you light the Neres Chanukah, you become the mitzvah of Neres Chanukah. And even if it goes out 5 minutes later, kavsa ein zakukla, you're not responsible, you don't have to relight it. You were already yotzei the mitzvah when you made the zeichel l'neis, right when you lit it. But, we saw in the footnote, if it's clear that it's going to go out immediately, somehow the flame is just not taking to the wick, then you didn't do a hadlaka. If you didn't do a hadlaka, So if it goes out, you have to light it. It's going to go out immediately. You have to relight it because that means you never did a hadlaka. If it never caught well and it's going to go out immediately, that's not a hadlaka. But if you did a hadlaka and it went out 5 minutes later, then kavsa ein zakakla. Now the question that the mafarshim and the achronim, the question that they talk about here, even early achronim, what they talk about is, wait a second. What happens? We know it's true hadlaka is a mitzvah. The lighting is what accomplishes the mitzvah. But l'chayra, you have to do a lighting that's roy to burn for half an hour. When you go ahead to light the Chanukah licht, you have to know that you have enough oil in the cup that it's going to burn for a half hour. If you only had a drop of oil, so you know it's going to burn for 2 minutes, are we going to say hadlaka is a mitzvah? You accomplished the mitzvah when you did the lighting? We know it's not going to burn for half an hour. It's not possible for it to burn for half an hour. You only have 2 minutes worth of fuel in there. So you have to put in enough fuel. So what does this mean? If you're lighting with inferior wicks and inferior fuel, where it's not going to burn for half an hour, how could we say that hadlaka is a mitzvah? So there are different approaches to answer this. The easier approach, which I believe is the Beis HaLevi says this. The Beis HaLevi says that what we're talking about over here is, we're talking about inferior fuel, inferior wicks. It's not vadai. It's not certain that it's going to go out. It's an inferior wick. It's an inferior fuel. So it doesn't make a nice, clean, burning flame. It makes a sputtering flame. And when you have a sputtering flame, sometimes the flame goes out. But it's only sometimes. It's a milsa deloy shchicha, says the Beis HaLevi. And since it's a milsa deloy shchicha, we don't have to be chayshish for it. That's the approach of the Beis HaLevi. There's a Rashash, however. Rashash, the Chav Aleph Amud Beis in Shabbos, the Rashash says no. The Rashash says this, that you have to put enough fuel in the cup that it should burn for a half hour. He doesn't say it straight out, but the clear mashmois from the Rashash is that's only lechatchila. The words of the Rashash is, the reason you have to put in enough oil is so that it should be nireh, it should be obvious that you're doing the mitzvah ba'ayin yafeh, that you're doing the mitzvah in a nice, open-handed way, that you're not being stingy on the mitzvah. But b'di'eved, if you just lit the nair with a little bit of oil, you're yaitza the mitzvah. And therefore the Rashash says over here, yeah, taka, hadlaka is a mitzvah, and kafsa in zakakla. Even if you're using very inferior wicks or very inferior fuel, and it probably will go out during the half hour, you yaitza the mitzvah anyway. Now, this happens to be, it jives well with what we learned back on Thursday, where we discussed this, and we said that, the shiur of a half an hour, let's remember that the shiur of a half an hour was developed back in the day of the original takana of Neres Chanukah, where we were doing Parsumei Nisa for the Rabbim. We were lighting outside by the door, and we were concentrating on Parsumei Nisa de Rabbim, and we said that the window of opportunity of Parsumei Nisa de Rabbim back in those days was a half an hour starting from Tzeis HaKechavim, because that's when Oivrin V'Shavin, that's when people were walking outside in the gas. So that's when you have the opportunity for Parsumei Nisa L'Rabbim. But nowadays, we're not concentrating on Parsumei Nisa L'Rabbim, we concentrate on Parsumei Nisa L'Bnei Bayis. If so, what is this ambiguous shiur of a half an hour? The Parsumei Nisa to Bnei Bayis were yoitz in the first 5 minutes that the neiros are burning. The 5 people that are in the house saw the neiros. Nobody knew who was going to see the neiros anymore. They saw the neiros. And that's why we learned on Thursday, there are poskim who say that there is no shiur of a half an hour nowadays. We paskin that there is, but there are poskim that say that there is no shiur of a half an hour nowadays. That fits very well with this. Taka, you could use inferior wicks, inferior fuel, and kafsei zakakla, even if it goes out after 10 minutes, and even if you knew that it was very yitachin that it would go out after 10 minutes. Doesn't matter. Okay. Ice cotton bays in the Mishnah Berurah. Ksheirun l'ner Chanukah, all types of oils, all types of wicks are kosher for ner Chanukah. When we call makom, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, mitzvah bin amuvchar, it definitely is a choicer kiyum of the mitzvah, likach lipsila, to take for the wicks, tzemer gefen, nice cotton, oichute pishton, or pieces of flax that make good wicks. Shuman oichelav hanesar mibasa b'cholav. Let's say you have fats that are forbidden because they are basa b'cholav. Also, lahadlik b'menu ner Chanukah. You can't use them for ner Chanukah. Now, you know why you can't use them for ner Chanukah? The reason you can't use them for ner Chanukah is because there's an iser bishul by basa b'cholav. You're not allowed to cook basa b'cholav. So if you have oils or fats that somehow are basa b'cholav, you can't burn them, because by burn them you're accomplishing bishul. So this is also mitam yeridea. You're not allowed to burn them because it's an iser bishul of basa b'cholav. V'gam kain, and similarly also levetule b'shishim lahadlik b'menu, nor could you go ahead and be bevatel them b'shishim in order to burn them. Hanei hagid lahadlik b'yam rishon echad, those who have the minig of mahadrin min mahadrin, so you light one licht on the first day, or mikan ve'elech meisef ha'ilech, and then you add on another licht every day like we do. Tzarich sheyiyah hanoisaf doima l'ner ha'ikr. This is a very, very interesting halacha. We know that you could light with shemen zayis. We know that you could light with a candle. What if you're a little strapped for oil or a little strapped for candles, and now it's the fourth night of Chanukah? You only have enough shemen zayis for 2 lichtalach, and then you have candles. So you say to yourself, listen, I know that shemen zayis is a mitzvah bin amuvchar, so maybe tonight's the fourth night. I'll light tonight's licht, the new one, the new licht. I'll do shemen zayis, and then the rest I'll do candles. So on one menorah, you can have candles and oil. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you can't do that. All of the additional lichtalach have to be similar to the new one for that day, to the ner ikr. And I think the reason for this is because if you have some of one type and some of another type, it's not nicker that the same person lit all of them. Somebody might think one person lit those, somebody else lit those. But people who have the minig of the Ramah of Mahadrin and Mahadrin, that not only does each person light a new licht for the new night, but each person in the house lights his own menorah. One person could light oil, and somebody else could light candles. So why not? Shemen HaGozel, stolen oil. Tzarich iyun kashel in ner Chanukah. He brings down here, we have to look into whether or not you could use stolen oil for ner Chanukah. Ice cut gimel in ner Chanukah, all wicks and all oils are kosher for ner Chanukah. Aval loy lahashamish. Very interesting. Brings down from the Magen Avram, while all wicks and all oils are kosher for ner Chanukah, they're not kosher for the shamish. What? The shamish is more chomer than the regular Chanukah licht? So we have to go further with Mishnah Berurah. What the Magen Avram means to say is the b'Shabbos Chanukah, on Shabbos of Chanukah, aser laseis hashamish me'ashmanim u'psiloi she'ein madlikin ben b'Shabbos. When it's Shabbos of Chanukah, the shamish cannot be from inferior wicks or inferior oil that you're not allowed to use for Ner Shabbos. Why? Some of you are already realizing why. Says the Mishnah Berurah why. You're allowed to benefit from the light of the shamish. So you could learn by the light of the shamish. You could read a book by the light of the shamish. Oh, imkain, if so, chayshid on shemayate. Then on Shabbos, if you're going to use the shamish, if you're going to make the shamish out of inferior fuel or an inferior wick, and then you're going to take a Rambam and bring it over to the shamish to read the Rambam, and you can't read clearly because it's sputtering, shemayate. You might adjust the wick, and you might be over avarim in daraisa. But we don't have that problem with the Chanukah licht, because the Chanukah licht also lihistamish behem. You're not allowed to benefit from the Chanukah licht, so you can't read a Rambam by the Chanukah licht. So even on Shabbos of Chanukah, you could use inferior oils and inferior wicks for the Chanukah licht, but you can't for the shamish. That would be a good trivia question. In what way is the din of the shamish more chomer than the din of the Chanukah lichtalach themselves? Continues the Mishnah Berurah here, Im nimtza achbar bashemen. If you found a rodent of some kind in the oil, mosu, that makes the oil repulsive, v'asal in Chanukah, and you are no longer allowed to use it for Neros Chanukah. Okay, so we've concluded Daf Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Beis. We'll stop with the words of the Ramah. And now, let's take a look at the Dirshu. And let's take a look at some of the Dirshu footnotes from Siman Tuf Reish Ayin Beis that I think are very, very interesting. So, if you turn your Dirshu Mishnah Berurah to Daf Kuf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, and you take a look at Dirshu footnote number 16. Now, Dirshu footnote number 16 is going on Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Hay. Now, in Sif Beis, by the Mechaber, we learned that you have to put in enough shemen so that the Chanukah licht should burn for a half an hour. Now, if you take a look at the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Hay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 lines down in the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim said, Achein, kol zehu l'din ha-Talmud. When we speak about this share of a half an hour, this is really l'din ha-Talmud, shahaya ha-heker l'oivrim v'shavim, when we were concentrating on the Prasumei Nusa for the Bnei Rishus HaRabim, people that are coming and going in the Rishus HaRabim. However, nowadays, the ha-heker hurak l'bnei beisai, that the main Prasumei Nisa is inside, la'olam ba'yishir ha-yadua, you still need the shiur of a half an hour. So in other words, what the Mechaber had said was like this. The Mechaber said, if you remember, the proper time to light Chanukah licht is by Tzeis HaKechavim. And they have to burn for a half an hour after Tzeis HaKechavim. B'di'eved, the Mechaber said, what happened if you neglected to light the Chanukah licht by Tzeis HaKechavim? So the Mechaber said you could even light later, but you could only light that window of opportunity until a half an hour later. Once it's half an hour later, you miss the Oivrim V'Shavim in the Rishus HaRabim. People aren't coming and going in the Rishus HaRabim anymore. Now, later on, the Mechaber said, B'di'eved, you can even light later. But Me'ikar Adin, really, you're supposed to light at Seis, and you're supposed to burn for a half an hour. If you didn't light at Seis, you could light later. So let's say you light 15 minutes after Seis. Said the Mechaber, now you have to put in enough oil that the licht should burn, not for a half hour, but for 15 minutes. Because again, the Oivrim V'Shavim in the Rishus HaRabim are that half hour. The half hour that begins with Tzeis and runs for a half hour. If you light at Tzeis, you need a half hour of oil. If you light 15 minutes after Tzeis, you only need 15 minutes of oil. Because you only have 15 minutes left to the Oivrim V'Shavim in the Rishus HaRabim. And on that, the Chavetz Chaim commented in Sif Hey, that was Medida to Talmudah. That's in the days of Chazal. But nowadays, when we're doing Prasumei Nisa for the Bnei Bayis, you have to put in fuel for half an hour no matter when you light. Even if you light later. Because the fact that there's no Oivrim V'Shavim in the Rishus HaRabim is not negay. Okay, so now Dirshu footnote 16 asks like this. We've established that the Iker Prasumei Nisa for the Bnei Rishus HaRabim is for that half hour. Why? Because that's when people were outside in the days of Chazal. When were people outside in the Rishus HaRabim? There were no street lamps. There were no cars with headlights. There was no flashlights. So when were people out? People were out for a half hour after Tzeis. They had to go home. But after that, nobody was outside. But, says the footnote here, but what if you live in Manhattan? I was in Manhattan during the summer for something, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, the streets are rocking and rolling. There's plenty of people out. So if you live in a place where people are coming and going in the Rishus HaRabim even late at night, right, in Lakewood, Borough Park, there's people out in the street 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night. Dayik HaGrin Soloveitchik, the Brisker Rav, he was Medayik from the Rambam, Miloshon Rambam. Shekosov, the Rambam writes, the Kamuhu Zman Zeh, what is the proper Zman for Adlokis Deris? Kemoi Chatzi Shah, like a half hour, oy yoiser, or more. Ooh, what did the Rambam mean, oy yoiser? Says the Brisker Rav, sheyesh b'kaimos, obviously there are places, shebehem zman hadlaka hu yaiser b'chazisha. You can be medayik from the Rambam that there are places where the zman is longer than a half hour. If you live in a place where the Oivrim V'Shavim in the Rishus Harabim are more than a half hour, they're late at night, then the zman maybe is longer, says the Brisker Rav. V'hainu kishiyesh Oivrim V'Shavim Rishus Harabim la'achar chasisha mitzesek echavim. So that's the diuk that the Brisker Rav wanted to make. Now, if you skip to the next paragraph, Be'idach, on the other hand, Das HaGoyin Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Shegam b'mekayim sheyesh Oivrim V'Shavim achamu v'cheres b'layla, ein chiv mikra adin lahadlik elachatisha. Rav Shlomo Zalman, Zedek Tzaddik V'Kol V'Racha, said, no, even if you live in a locale where there are plenty of people outside at night, late at night, the shiur is not more than a half an hour. Ella sheyesh lahader ulahadlik b'mekayim elu shetikla regel b'hem. But there is room for a hidur mitzvah. Rav Shlomo Zalman said, if you know that there are people outside, so there's a hidur mitzvah to light for longer. V'chein hoya min hagay. And that was the minig of Rav Shlomo Zalman. V'chein das hagay Rav Shalom al Yashiv. Rav Yashiv also said that way. She'ein lahadlik yosef b'chatzisha b'mekayim sanal ela mishum hidur. The only reason to light for longer, even when people are out late at night, is only hidur mitzvah. Va'afilu im yesh rak ma'at oivrim v'shavim la'achar chatzisha. Rabbi Yashiv said, even if there's only some people outside after a half hour, daitai sheyesh inyan lahamshech esad lokal l'frasim sanes. There's an inyan of pursuing Nisa, but it's only a hidur mitzvah. Kamay shamashma b'gemara v'kein hayom in hagay. Okay. Now, if you skip a few lines, the Kosav Agayid Reb Chaim Kanievsky, sheminag hachazon ish haya licht b'isas haneres chatzi shalach hazes kechavim. The Chazon Ish put his menorah out after a half hour. Chutz mi b'layla achron, except for the last night of Chanukah. Why he did different on the last night of Chanukah, I don't know, but I can tell you, I have a very hard time going to sleep on the last night of Chanukah. I keep adding oil to my menorah, and I just can't give up the Chanukah licht. Sometimes I just stay up staring at the menorah. It's very hard for me to give up the Chanukah licht and finally either let it burn out or just put it out because I have to go to sleep. I'm not going to be able to get up in the morning for Shachris. But it's very hard. It's very hard for me to give it up. Maybe that was the Chazon Ish also. Maybe the last night of Chanukah, he just couldn't give it up. Weiter. Let's go further in this footnote. Somebody who's lighting mamish in the house, not even by a window. So he's really only lighting the Chanukah lichtalach for the people in the house. He's not doing Parsu B'Nisa for the outside at all. There's no havamina that you have to burn the Chanukah licht as long as people are up in the house. For that, there's no havamina. There's a hidur mitzvah that if you're doing Parsu B'Nisa for the Rishus Harabim, then you should let them burn as long as there are even some people outside. But in the house, if you're only doing Parsu B'Nisa in the house, maybe you'll say, maybe I have to keep them burning as long as people are up. Says Rabbi Yashiv, no, that is no havamina to say. And he has a very nice svara. Eladai sheyidlak chatishat zicha enough to burn for a half hour. Why? Kevut she'ein Parsu B'Nisa b'bayis ela la'osam anashim sheroas aner b'tchilas halayla. The Parsu B'Nisa in the house, you're not doing anything new. If there are 5 people in the house, those 5 people saw the nearest when you lit. So they had Parsu B'Nisa then. You accomplished the Parsu B'Nisa with them. The B'nai Rishus Harabim, you have Oivrim V'Shavim. New people are constantly walking by your window. So you're accomplishing new Parsu B'Nisa on a constant basis. That's why there's a hidur mitzvah to keep them burning for the B'nai Rishus Harabim. But in the house, there's no new Parsu B'Nisa. Whoever saw it at 4:30 when you lit sees it at 6 o'clock too. There's nothing new. Now skip a few lines to the next paragraph. Another interesting shayla. How about if you live in a Goyish neighborhood and the Parsu B'Nisa that you have for the Rishus Harabim, the people outside of the Rishus Harabim are only non-Jews. There's no Yidden walking outside. Kasa b'shal Chuvas Igros Moshe, the Rishivas Zatzal Igros Moshe wrote, Shemistabish Shepirsa B'neis L'Nachrim Ein Klum. The Rishivas Zatzal was of the opinion that Parsumi Nisa for non-Jews is inconsequential. It doesn't matter. There's no Indian at all. But Me'idach, the next paragraph, Dasa going to Yosef Shalom Al Yashiv Zatzal, Shamash B'Mirashi, brings that arrive from Rashi that there is an Indian of Parsumi Nisa even for non-Jews. Now, Dirshu footnote number 17. So this is going on also in Mishnah Berurah is Cut and Hay, where the Mishnah Berurah said nowadays our Parsumi Nisa is mainly for the Bnei Bayis. Now in Eretz Yisrael, most people I would venture to say light outside. In Chutz La'aretz, the vast majority of people light inside. They light by a window, But how about many people have come up with the question, especially in thoroughly Jewish neighborhoods, Borough Park, Lakewood. So maybe we should light outside? So it says over here in the footnote, Baruch Hashem, there are plenty of places now where there's no sakana involved in lighting outside by the door. So maybe we should light outside by the door. Since in the days of Chazal there already was a sakana to light outside. There's definitely at least a possibility that it will spur anti-Semitism to light outside. You don't have to go and be frummer than when they started lighting inside. Once that was established, it's okay. Don't forget that you're in Gullus. Don't start probing. It's like the famous Meshech Chochmah who wrote on Berlin. He said, people think that Berlin is Yerushalayim. From Berlin is going to come trouble for the Yidden. And we know what happened. We know how that ended. So don't think that Borough Park is Yerushalayim. Don't think Lakewood is Yerushalayim. It's not. You're in Gullus. So don't have Grace Chanukah syndrome. Don't go ahead and say I'm gonna light outside and everything will be fine. Okay, those are the footnotes that I wanted to do that I thought were very, very fascinating. So we'll stop over here. And Baruch Hashem, we picked up another page. So Baruch Hashem, with the next year, we'll pick up with Kuf Mem Beis Amud Aleph. Thank you so much for joining me for limud haTorah. Discuss of limud haTorah should be begging against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom should say Yeshua's refuahs parnasit sheduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the BS Kal Tzedek. B'meherav Yameinu. Amen. Be well.